In 1979, a journalist asked Peter Sellers the simplest question imaginable: who are you when you're not acting? The silence that followed stretched for an unbearable length. 10 seconds, 15. The journalist shifted uncomfortably, wondering if he had somehow offended the greatest comic actor of his generation. Finally, Peter Sellers spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, stripped of the 1,000 accents and characters that had made him famous. Just a man, speaking what might have been the only honest words of his life. There is no me. I do not exist. There used to be a me, but I had it surgically removed. He was not joking. Peter Sellers never joked about this particular truth, because it was the foundation upon which his entire existence and his entire tragedy was built. Behind the French detective and the mad scientist and the Indian actor and the 100 other characters that had made the world laugh, there was nothing. An absence, a void where a person should have been. The man who could become anyone had become no one. The performer who wore 1,000 faces had lost his own. The actor who made millions laugh spent his private hours staring into mirrors, searching for someone who was not there, who had never been there, who had been erased so early and so completely that he could not remember what he had lost. This is the story of that erasure, the story of a mother who consumed her son. The story of 8 heart attacks, 4 destroyed marriages, and 2 children who grew up with a ghost for a father. The story of the funniest man of the 20th century, who could not find a single reason to smile when the cameras stopped rolling. Peter Sellers made you laugh. Now you will understand why he could not. The story begins with a death, not Peter's death that comes later, and we will get there soon enough. The death that shaped everything came 2 years before Peter was born, when a baby named Richard Sellers drew a single breath and then stopped breathing forever. Stillborn. The word itself contains a terrible contradiction. A life that was still before it began, a birth that was also a death, a child who existed only as a name on a gravestone and an ache in his mother's heart that would never heal. Peg Sellers, born Agnes Marks, was a woman of tremendous ambition and limited success. She had dreamed of theatrical stardom, of seeing her name in lights above West End stages, of escaping the dreary vaudeville circuits where she performed her act night after night for audiences who barely paid attention. The dream had not come true. The lights had not spelled her name. The escape had not materialized. And now her first child was dead. When she became pregnant again, something shifted in Peg's psychology. This child would not merely be a child. This child would be a redemption, a second chance, a vessel into which she could pour all her thwarted ambitions, all her unrealized dreams, all the talent that the world had refused to recognize in her. She would create a star, she would manufacture greatness, and the raw material would be her son. Richard Henry Sellers was born on September 8, 1925 in Southsea, England. He was named after his dead brother, the first indication that his identity would never truly belong to him, that he would always be standing in for someone else, living a life that had been meant for another. Peg called him Peter. Perhaps she could not bear to use the name Richard, which belonged to the ghost. Perhaps she wanted some small separation between the dead child and the living one, but the separation was only nominal. In every other way, Peter Sellers would spend his childhood becoming what his mother demanded, filling the space that his brother's death had left, justifying his existence by erasing it. Peg's control over Peter was absolute and suffocating. She did not raise him so much as program him, engineering every aspect of his development with the precision of a factory foreman and the obsession of an artist who has only one canvas and infinite ambition. She kept him out of school. Other children would contaminate him, would teach him ordinary things, would make him common. Peter was not to be common. Peter was to be extraordinary, and extraordinary required isolation, required complete dependence on his mother, required the elimination of any influence that might compete with her vision. She dressed him, she fed him, she decided when he slept and when he woke, and what he thought about in the hours between. She slept in his room until he was a teenager, monitoring his dreams, ensuring that even his unconscious mind remained under her supervision. When Peter showed an aptitude for mimicry, reproducing voices from the radio, imitating the servants and neighbors with an accuracy that was sometimes unsettling, Peg recognized the commercial potential immediately. Here was the talent that would carry them both to stardom. Here was the gift that would justify everything she had sacrificed, everything she had endured, everything she had lost when Richard died and left her with nothing but grief and ambition. She pushed Peter onto stages while he was still young enough to require help climbing the steps. She drilled him in characters and accents, praising success with suffocating affection and punishing failure with a cold withdrawal that devastated the boy more completely than any physical discipline could have. Peter learned the lesson that would define his life. Love was conditional. Approval had to be earned through performance. His value as a human being depended entirely on his ability to become someone else, to transform into whatever character his mother demanded, to disappear into roles so completely that there was nothing left of the boy who had started the performance. By the time he reached adulthood, the process was complete. Peter Sellers had been manufactured. The product was flawless, a performer of unprecedented range, capable of becoming anyone, of wearing any face, of speaking in any voice. The cost was everything else. The boy who might have existed had been overwritten. The self that might have developed had been suppressed, then erased, then forgotten entirely. Where other people had identities, Peter Sellers had only an emptiness waiting to be filled by the next character, the next performance, the next temporary escape from the unbearable reality of his own absence. The war came, as wars do, and Peter enlisted in the Royal Air Force. He was not suited for combat. His talents lay elsewhere, so he became an entertainment officer, performing for troops, discovering that he could make strangers laugh. That laughter was a form of love, available even to someone who did not know how to connect in ordinary ways. After the war, he drifted toward radio, where his gift for voices could flourish without the complication of being seen. The BBC's Goon show became his launching pad, a surrealist comedy program that would influence generations of comedians, from Monty Python to countless others who learned from its anarchic energy that comedy could be intelligent, subversive, genuinely strange. Peter played multiple characters on every episode. Blue Bottle, the cowardly Boy Scout who died repeatedly and always returned. Henry Crun, the ancient, doddering fool. Major Bloodknock, the corrupt military officer, whose digestive system was a recurring character in itself. He switched between them with a fluidity that amazed listeners and disturbed colleagues who watched him work. Spike Milligan, his co-star and collaborator, understood something about Peter that others missed. Spike struggled with his own mental health, his own demons, his own inability to fit comfortably into ordinary existence. He recognized a fellow traveler in the darkness. Peter didn't act. Spike observed years later. He was possessed. The characters didn't come from him, they came through him, as if he were a medium channeling spirits, and when the spirits left, when the performance ended, there was nothing there, just a man sitting in a chair, waiting for the next possession, because waiting was all he knew how to do. The waiting was unbearable. Between performances, between characters, Peter confronted the void at his center and did not know how to survive the confrontation. He could not make small talk. He had no personality to make small talk with. He could not relax. Relaxation required being comfortable with yourself, and there was no self to be comfortable with. He could not simply exist. Existence required someone to exist, and Peter Sellers was no one, so he filled the void the only way he knew how, with characters, with performances, with marriages that promised connection and delivered only new audiences for his endless transformations, with children who would grow up wondering who their father really was, never receiving a satisfying answer because there was no satisfying answer to receive. 4 women married Peter Sellers. 4 women believed they had found love, had found connection, had found a man worth building a life with. 4 women discovered, each in her own way, that they had married a ghost. Anne Howe was first. She met Peter in 1951, when his star was rising, but had not yet reached its zenith. He was charming. He was attentive. He was everything a young woman could want in a husband, for approximately 6 months. Then the character she had married disappeared, replaced by someone else entirely, someone cold where he had been warm, someone distant where he had been present, someone unrecognizable. I never knew which Peter would come home, Anne said after their divorce. Some nights he was loving, playful, the man I had fallen for. Other nights he was cruel, suspicious, convinced I was betraying him. Most nights he was simply absent, physically there but mentally somewhere else, inhabiting some character in his head. performing for an audience I couldn't see. They had 2 children, Michael and Sarah. Peter loved them in the way he loved everything, intensely but briefly, passionately but inconsistently, with a fervor that burned bright and then guttered out without warning. He forgot their birthdays. He missed their milestones. He was present for their childhood, in body and absent in every way that mattered. Britt Ekland came next. Swedish, blonde, beautiful in the way that 1960s starlets were beautiful, impossibly glamorous, almost unreal. Peter became obsessed with her, then jealous of her, then paranoid that she was plotting against him. He hired private detectives to follow her. He accused her of affairs she was not having. He alternated between desperate declarations of love and cold accusations of betrayal until she no longer knew which version of her husband was real, not understanding that none of them were real, that reality was precisely what Peter Sellers could not provide. Miranda Quarry, Lynn Frederick. 2 more marriages, 2 more failures, 2 more women who reached for a man and found only smoke, only characters, only the performance of intimacy without its substance. Each divorce left Peter more convinced that connection was impossible, that love was a role he could not sustain, that he was doomed to be alone even in the company of people who genuinely wanted to be with him. He was not wrong. How can you connect with someone who does not exist? How can you love a void? The women who married Peter Sellers were not failed by a cruel man. They were failed by an absent one, by a space where a husband should have been, by a ghost who could not give them what he did not possess. On April 6, 1964, in a Hollywood studio, Peter Sellers died. He was 38 years old. He was in the middle of filming a comedy called Kiss Me Stupid. One moment he was preparing for a scene. The next moment he was on the floor. His heart stopped, his body already beginning the process of becoming a corpse. The doctors revived him. His heart started again. Then it stopped. Then it started. Then it stopped again. 8 times in a single afternoon, Peter Sellers crossed the boundary between life and death, pulled back each time by medical intervention, by luck, by whatever force decides that some people are not yet finished with their suffering. When he finally stabilized, he was changed. The multiple cardiac arrests had damaged his heart permanently. The doctors told him he would need to stop smoking, reduce stress, live carefully. He ignored them. But something else had shifted, something harder to quantify than arterial damage. Peter claimed he had seen the other side. He spoke of a white light, a sense of peace, an absence of fear that he had never experienced in life. He became obsessed with spirituality, with psychics, with communication from beyond the grave. He consulted mediums before making major decisions. He sought messages from the dead with the desperation of someone who had glimpsed an alternative to the emptiness he carried. Perhaps he had seen something genuine. Perhaps the brain, starved of oxygen, had generated hallucinations that felt like revelation. Perhaps dying 8 times in an afternoon simply breaks something in a person, reshapes their relationship with existence in ways that cannot be undone. What is certain is this: after April 6, 1964, Peter Sellers was racing toward his own death. Not actively. He did not plan suicide, did not seek destruction, but he also did not avoid it. He continued smoking despite his damaged heart. He continued working at a pace that would have exhausted a healthy man. He continued living as if time were running out, as if he had glimpsed the deadline and was trying to accomplish everything before it arrived. The deadline would arrive in 16 years. Peter would not waste them. Inspector Jacques Clouseau entered Peter's life in 1963 and refused to leave. The bumbling French detective, star of the Pink Panther films, was conceived as a secondary character, a comic foil for David Niven's suave jewel thief. But Peter's performance overwhelmed the film, stole every scene, demanded that future installments center on Clouseau rather than the sophisticated criminal he was supposed to be chasing. The public loved Clouseau. The studios loved Clouseau. The money flowed with each new installment. The Pink Panther, A Shot in the Dark, Return of the Pink Panther, The Pink Panther Strikes Again. Peter Sellers became synonymous with the French detective, became wealthy beyond imagination, became one of the most famous comic actors in the world. Peter hated every moment of it. Clouseau is a prison, he said in interview after interview, his frustration barely concealed. Every time I put on that ridiculous costume, I feel myself disappearing. Not into a character, into nothing. Clouseau is not a person. Clouseau is a collection of pratfalls and bad accents. Playing him is not acting. Playing him is dying slowly while everyone applauds. The irony was devastating. Peter had spent his entire life disappearing into characters, using transformation as an escape from his own emptiness. Now he had created a character so successful that it threatened to become his only identity, to swallow whatever remained of the person he might have been. He tried to escape. He made other films, serious films, artistic films, films that showcased his range and intelligence. Some succeeded, many failed. None achieved the commercial success of the Pink Panther franchise, which hung around his neck like a lucrative noose. The studios wanted more Clouseau. The audiences 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 wanted more Clouseau. Peter Sellers wanted to be anyone else, and discovered finally that being anyone else was not the same as being someone. In 1979, Peter Sellers found a script that would become his final masterpiece, his confession, his testament. Being There told the story of Chance, a simple gardener who has spent his entire life in a wealthy man's house, tending plants and watching television. He knows nothing of the world beyond the garden walls. He has no education, no sophistication, no interior life to speak of. When circumstances thrust him into society, his bland observations about gardening are mistaken for profound political wisdom. He rises to the heights of power because people project their own desires onto his emptiness, see in his blank face whatever they want to see. Peter read the script and understood immediately. This was his autobiography. Chance is me, he told director Hal Ashby. Chance has always been me. A reflection with nothing behind it, a surface that shows people what they want, a man who succeeds because emptiness is easier to believe in than complexity. The performance he delivered was unlike anything he had done before. No accents, no physical comedy, no transformation into someone demonstrably other than himself. Instead, Peter played absence. He played the void. He looked into the camera with eyes that contained nothing, no thought, no feeling, no personality, and allowed audiences to project meaning onto his blankness. Critics hailed it as a revelation. The Academy nominated him for an Oscar. Audiences debated whether Chance was a satire of political gullibility or something deeper, something stranger, something that touched on questions about identity and meaning that comedy rarely approached. Peter knew what it was. It was the truth, finally spoken. It was the confession he had been trying to make his entire life, delivered in the only language he knew, performance. He did not win the Oscar. He did not need to. Being There had accomplished something more important. It had allowed Peter Sellers, for one brief moment, to be honest about who he was, or rather, who he wasn't. By 1980, Peter's heart was failing. The damage from 1964, compounded by 16 years of ignoring medical advice, had accumulated into a death sentence that everyone could see except, perhaps, the man living it. He continued working. He made another Pink Panther film, surrendering once again to the character he despised, cashing the check that would provide for his family after he was gone. He planned future projects that would never materialize. He consulted his psychics about when the end would come, seeking certainty about the one thing no one can know. On July 26, 1980, Peter Sellers suffered a massive heart attack in his London hotel room. He had spent the evening with friends, had seemed more present than usual, more engaged, more genuinely himself, whatever that meant. Perhaps the proximity of death had clarified something for him. Perhaps knowing the end was near had given him, finally, permission to stop performing. He collapsed shortly after midnight. The doctors tried to revive him, as they had 16 years earlier. This time, the heart that had stopped 8 times in a single afternoon, that had kept beating against all odds, finally refused to start again. Peter Sellers was 54 years old. They held the funeral at Golders Green Crematorium on a grey London afternoon, the kind of day that seems designed for mourning, for reflection, for the contemplation of lives that have ended too soon. Hundreds attended, actors who had worked alongside Peter and marveled at his transformations, directors who had tried to reach the man beneath the performances and failed, producers who had profited enormously from his talent, fans who had laughed at his films without ever suspecting the void that created them. The entertainment industry paid its respects with flowers and speeches, and the particular kind of performative grief that Hollywood has perfected over decades of practice. Everyone said the right things. Everyone expressed the appropriate sorrow. Everyone pretended that they had known Peter Sellers when in truth no one had known him, because there was no Peter Sellers to know. Spike Milligan gave the eulogy. Who else could? Who else had known Peter long enough, had seen behind enough of the masks, had understood that the masks were all there was. "I loved Peter," Spike said, his voice breaking. "Everyone loved Peter, or loved one of the characters he played, which is not quite the same thing. He was the most talented performer I ever knew, and the most alone. He spent his whole life becoming other people because being himself was impossible, and now he's gone, and I realize that I don't know who we've lost. A friend, a collection of voices, a void that could make us laugh." Per Peter's instructions, the service ended with Glenn Miller's "In the Mood." Not somber, not mournful. Entertainment, even at the end. Performance, even in death. The audience tapped their feet. Some smiled. They remembered Inspector Clouseau tripping over furniture, Dr. Strangelove wrestling with his own arm, Claire Quilty cycling through identities in Lolita. They remembered the laughter. They did not remember, could not remember, because they had never known the man behind the characters, the child who had been erased to make room for his mother's ambitions, the void that had worn 1,000 faces because it had no face of its own. Robin Williams, Jim Carrey, John Belushi, Chris Farley. The list of comedians who have spoken publicly about feeling empty inside, about using performance as escape from themselves, about the terror of being alone with their own thoughts when the audience goes home and the applause fades. It is long, and it grows longer with each generation that inherits the tradition of making strangers laugh while privately drowning. They are all Peter Sellers' heirs, whether they know it or not. They all inherited his gift and his curse, the ability to transform that is also the inability to remain, the talent for becoming anyone that coexists with the tragedy of being no one. They all discovered what Peter discovered, that making people laugh is not the same as being happy, that applause is not the same as love, that the roar of an audience cannot fill the silence inside. Some survived, some did not. The ones who died, Belushi at 33, Farley at 33, Williams at 63, died with the same void inside them that Peter carried, the same desperate search for something real beneath all the performance, the same exhaustion that comes from entertaining others while being unable to comfort yourself. In his final interview, conducted just weeks before his death, Peter was asked what he would want written on his tombstone. It was meant as a light question, the kind of thing journalists ask to end interviews on an amusing note, to give the subject a chance to be clever one last time. He thought for a long moment, then he offered a sad smile, not a performed smile, not a character's smile, but something that might have been genuine. "Here lies a man who was everyone," he said. "May he finally rest as himself." He paused, "Although I don't know what that would look like. Being myself. After 54 years, I never did figure that out. Perhaps I'll learn in whatever comes next. The man who made you laugh was empty inside. Not cruel, not malicious, just absent. A space where a person should have been, filled with characters and voices and performances that entertained millions while leaving him utterly alone. His mother manufactured him into a star and erased the boy who might have existed. His wives tried to find the man behind the masks and discovered there was nothing to find. His children grew up with a father who was always performing, always transforming, always somewhere else even when he was in the room. He gave you Clouseau. He gave you Strangelove. He gave you Chance the Gardener. He gave you 100 characters, 1,000 voices, a lifetime of transformation. He never gave you Peter Sellers, because Peter Sellers did not exist, had never existed, was erased before he had a chance to form, replaced by an infinite capacity for becoming anyone except himself. The next time you watch one of his films, the next time you laugh at Clouseau stumbling or Strangelove scheming, remember what you now know. Remember the mother. Remember the void. Remember the man with no face. That is the truth behind the laughter. That is the tragedy behind the comedy. And now you know.